I'm happy to introduce Tiffanie Lewis, Vice President, HR Technology and Service Solutions at Diebold Nixdorf. Tiffanie, welcome. I know we're going to have a lot of fun in our conversation today.
Thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be here.
So a few moments ago, we polled our audience on how they grade their current employee experience. Tiffanie, if you had to take a guess, how do you think most graded their experience on a scale of A to F?
This is a tough one. I think it really does depend on your industry. I think people who are in industries that are very progressive may say B, but people who are in industries that are long-term industries, long-term companies that may be laggy around this focus of employee experience may go with D. So I have two answers, if that's fair.
That's fair enough. Well, let's see what our poll results are. Are you surprised at all by these? So we've got 11% people of the audience grades themselves as an A in employee experience, with most a C. What's your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised. I think that a lot of companies are really shifting their focus and trying very aggressively, especially in this environment where employees and candidates are in control. They're really trying to step their game up in this space.
Mm-hmm. So what's foundational to you? What has come before the employee experience objective that we're all chasing?
What we like to say at our company is being brilliant at the basics. And what does that mean? How do you get to a place where you can create a seamless experience for employees? Well, one example is having a core HR system of record, like Oracle, which we have adopted. That's exactly what you need in order to have your data in one place so you can take the appropriate actions. You need to collect the data, personal information, job information, location, salary. These are basic things that tell you about your workforce and what you can and cannot do based upon that information. That's critical. I think what I would say secondarily to that, Jim, is the vision. At Diebold Nixdorf, our guiding principle is to be the undisputed leader of self-service technologies. And so when you are in the business of building and servicing ATMs, as well as self-checkout kiosks, self-service is what we are all about as a company. Mm-hmm. But how do we bring that experience to our workforce was something that was a challenge for us. But that's foundational. And then once you have that basic data in place, you can get to the wow factors.
Got it. So what's your operating model as you've approached employee experience?
Sure. Every organization needs to decide the cost that they're willing to pay to get the results that they want. And that's different for every organization. For us, one of the things that we wanted to do is really think about what could our journey be for digitization, but also how do we help employees with that journey? So one of the things that we created were employee service centers, and we wanted to have one point of contact for employees to say, if I have a question about anything related to HR, where do I start? And that was very helpful for us in that journey. So we leveraged Oracle's HR help desk for that capability. And we do have phone lines, but I'm very pleasingly surprised to say that only 4% of our employees contact us via phone. It's either email or self-service for 96% of our tickets.
Wow, that's impressive. So I understand that one of your proudest professional achievements has been your digital HR transformation that you embarked on during the pandemic. And if I remember right, you implemented your 3-year roadmap in 12 months.
That's
with
correct.
10 modules in 62 countries. Is that correct?
That's right. 10 modules, 62 countries, 12 months. And it was quite a journey, if I just say so.
So talk to us a little bit about that. Can you share more about that and how it's enhanced your employee experience?
Sure. Well, we started our HR transformation actually during the pandemic, which was quite challenging to do, being that most of us were remote during that entire time for the last 2 years. But we were committed to really figuring out how do we enhance the employee experience. We started with just collecting our core data in our core HR system, but we wanted to expand that experience from talent management, talent acquisition, compensation. It was very difficult to do with having so much disparity in our systems. And so in a lot of cases, we processed this information manually, and we did not have a consistent way to do that globally. So it was important for us to figure out what were those key next steps for us to enhance the experience, the overall employee journey, very similar to what Jason was saying, not just part ways of the journey, but looking at the entire employee life cycle was important for us. And so throughout the process, we talked about what would enhance the experience as we move forward. What can we do now, recognizing that we had a pretty aggressive timeline, and what
Yeah.
might we do later to optimize it for employees?
Great. So tell us about lessons learned on the journey.
Yes, I think one of the things that was a big lesson learned for us is to pay attention to language, and I'll come from two different perspectives of that. It's not just the mother tongue of your individual's language, but also what you call things. To Jason's point, if people are thinking about having a baby, they don't call their babies dependents. So if somebody wants to do a search and find a knowledge article about what do they do when they're having a baby, you should probably use the word baby, and you should probably have that word baby available in the language of the employee. And so that was something that we had to think about, definitions, and making sure that we could define things from the perspective of the employee, not from the perspective of HR, which is very challenging. And then having descriptions along the way was another very important thing. So we use info buttons to describe what is this section for, what is this button for, what can you do with it.
I'd like to talk with you about how does empathy play a role in how you're thinking about employee experience, and how does your perspective inform your work?
Absolutely. So during the past 2 years, my team have had a variety of experience. Some of them have been sick themselves, or their family members were sick, or they've had loss in their families. When I think about my team, it reminds me that they also are employees. They also have an experience, and they matter. And that gives me insight into what I should do and how we create plans for the future, just thinking about their own experiences, even though they're a part of the deployments or the implementations. My unique experience is, quite frankly, being an African American woman, I experience a lot of challenges that many people may not even imagine. My concerns, my fears, my personal circumstances are real, which gives me a unique ability to empathize quickly with others.
What a great perspective. Thank you for that. So Erin, I'm wondering, do we have any questions for Tiffanie from the audience?
We sure do. We have some great questions that have come in. The first one here I would want to start with for you, Tiffanie, is based on Diebold Nixdorf being in fintech, what have you had to think about in your employee experience that another industry might not have to?
Yes, well, thinking about personas, you have to think about your workforce and how your workforce is made up. For us, a significant portion of our workforce are service technicians, and they are essential workers. They are primarily remote, and they have needs as well, but very different than those who are in offices or who work at home and with their laptops. So we had to think about employee experience solutions, and we're still thinking about them. That we have to consider every type of worker in the business and how do you meet that need. So just yesterday, I was in the office talking to an HR business partner, and he was explaining that a manager is trying to find home address information for an employee, but they were frustrated with how long it was taking them to speak to somebody to get that information. And I said, well, have you tried the mobile app? And he said, I didn't know we could do that. And I said, yes, we can. And I said, in 3 minutes, I can get the home address as a manager of one of my employees. And he said, wow, I'm really going to have to show them that. And so those are the kinds of things that you have to make sure that you're thinking about, listening, and then thinking about what you're hearing and providing those solutions. And it's an ongoing journey.
Interesting. Erin, any other questions?
Yeah, I think expanding on that and some of the points that you just brought up, one question here that was posed, and that's actually pretty popular, is, well, what are your recommendations for effectively engaging the deskless worker that only has access to technology sporadically?
Lots of different options for that, and we are exploring some different ways, and I wish I could talk about all of them now. But some of it, you really have to consider, are they using their mobile devices? And if they're not using their mobile devices, how can you create a space for them to connect when they get to a location that maybe you have in that particular area. So is there a way where you can have a kiosk, for example, that's available to them? Is there a way that you could have, laptops in a business center in a location? And so one of the things that's really neat about Oracle is that you can access it from any location using any device. And so that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of making things available to all levels of our workforce.
Interesting. Erin, I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, I want to make sure I include this one for you, Tiffanie. The audience member says, I applaud your push for employee self-service. We have a requirement that most of the employee self-service questions be handled without people interaction. So they're asking for advice. How do you approach that?
We put a heavy emphasis during our deployment on knowledge articles and using a knowledge management system because we wanted to have the information that we knew, information we carried around in our heads or in our folders or in shared drives. We wanted to translate that information, transform that information into something that could be readily accessed for employees. So we had no central location for all that information, especially being in a global environment. And we put a huge focus on that. And I think by the time we went live, we had over 800 knowledge articles to make available to employees to find that. And so that focusing on the knowledge, getting it out of the heads of people and in the ways where it can be accessed by everyone in the company is extremely important to create that urgency or that solution, if you will, to that problem of not wanting to have a lot of human interaction.
Okay. Any other questions, Erin?
Yeah, we sure do have a lot of questions. Another one that's come in right now that I think would be interesting to hear from you, Tiffanie, is how are you at Diebold Nixdorf measuring the success of your employee experience?
Sure. I would say the employee adoption of the tools that you put in place is something that we definitely look at. We want to know how many people are leveraging the tools that we put in place. So how many people are accessing it on a monthly basis? How many people are using the new tools that we push out to them? What are they not using that we want them to use? And how do we provide a push to that? We look at the number of tickets in the Employee Service Center and where those particular areas are of focus that we need to spend more time. And then sometimes we dig into that with greater detail, especially if there's a blip or there's a trend of something spiked in a particular area that we did not expect. We have customer satisfaction surveys. We also have pulse surveys from an organizational perspective from employee engagement and annual engagement surveys. And so that all of those things are what we do to try to measure the success of the experience. And not to say that we've gotten it all figured out, but it is a starting point.
Excellent. I think we've got a lot of questions, Erin. Any others that you'd like to present to Tiffanie?
Yeah, I think this last one here poses an interesting question. My leadership is slow to accept that the world has changed and employees want remote opportunities. How do I help shift these attitudes around flexible work?
Sure. I am a huge believer that employees will help you with that. Pay attention to your attrition. Look at your time to fill roles. Candidates will help you with that. That's data that will give you insight for sure into whether or not your employee value proposition will stand. I was on a plane this week, and there were some passengers talking about a manufacturing engineer who wants to work 100% remote. And these two gentlemen were just furious. And they said, how could he think that he could do a manufacturing engineering job 100% remote? But I can imagine that probably when the world was shut down, there were manufacturing engineers who were at home and were effective at getting their work done. And so you have to think about this, and it goes back to changing a mindset. And being in a global pandemic has taught us that what we thought was not possible is certainly possible. And that is what we have to remember. And employers have to consider that flexibility and what flexibility they will offer so that that is unique to them, so that candidates will be willing to be a part of their organization and they can retain the key workforce that they have.
What a great answer. Well, I think we've got time maybe for two more questions, Erin.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we definitely have a lot more for you, Tiffanie. One other question that I have is, how do I get buy-in and resources from leadership on employee experience initiatives?
Yeah. One thing that is absolutely critical is to learn what the business objectives are and align your employee experience initiatives to those business objectives directly where possible. You have to make that initiative relevant to the leaders, relevant to your C-suite, so that they can support you with whatever you're trying to do. Especially, it depends on the size of your company and the tools that you're investing in. These are not cheap. There's an investment that is involved here, and leaders want to know that they're going to get some kind of return on that investment. Sometimes it's very difficult to measure in terms of hard dollars, looking at ROI. But when you think about what you can measure, like we talk about the 7 forms of waste, and complexity is a form of waste. And one of the things that you can do with digitization is eliminate complexity and move towards simplification, which ultimately will help the business leaders achieve that objective. So it's how do you tell that story for leaders to latch onto and then support you, not just in word, but also with the finances that you need to continue along the journey.
Okay, great. One more question.
Yeah, one more question. So you talked about the importance of eliminating complexity, and I think that translates well into this question here, which is, well, how do you actually determine what delivers value and what doesn't? And is it just an action for action's sake? Do you measure implementations?
Yeah, you can. And I can't say that in my career we haven't measured implementations just to see, can you get it done on time? Can you stay under budget? That's important. But at the end of the day, you can implement something and you can deliver it on time and under budget, but if no one's using it, you haven't gotten the value out of it. So this is something that's important to understand is who's using it? How are they using it? Are they asking you for more? And that is a real important measure for me is if I produce reports and they're helpful to leaders and they want more, that's a good sign that we're delivering value, right? If we are providing some self-service and leaders want more, then that's a sign that you're delivering value. And even if they want less and they're talking to you about what it is they don't like about it, that gives you an opportunity to make some adjustments in your plan. So all feedback is good feedback. It's either going to tell you what to do or it's going to tell you what not to do. And so that's always something you have to take into consideration as you're developing your journey.
Thank you so much.